The sun beat down on the scorched earth of a forgotten battlefield, the air thick with the scent of metal and oil. The distant rumble of engines echoed like thunder, announcing the arrival of a formidable force. Soldiers, clad in dust-covered uniforms, exchanged nervous glances, their hearts pounding beneath the weight of uncertainty. How could one vehicle, seemingly modest in stature, hold the power to change the course of a war? The compact silhouette of the StuG 3 stood in stark contrast to the towering tanks that loomed nearby, yet it was this underdog that would soon reveal a profound truth. As the tension mounted, a paradox emerged. Could a vehicle designed for support outmatch the heavily armored giants of the battlefield? This episode isn't about the StuG 3, it's about the unseen strategies and doctrines that ultimately decide wars. The context surrounding World War II was characterized by rapid technological advancements and evolving military doctrines. In the early years of the conflict, the German forces had gained a reputation for their blitzkrieg tactics, which emphasized speed and coordination. Military manuals of the time underscored the importance of armored divisions, believing that sheer firepower and heavy armor were the keys to victory. The Allies, on the other hand, were still grappling with the lessons of World War I, where trench warfare had dominated the landscape. They held on to the notion that large tanks with thick armor would prevail in any confrontation. As the war progressed, both sides were confronted with the harsh realities of combat. The effectiveness of traditional heavy tanks began to be questioned. The Germans, recognizing the need for a more versatile approach, developed the Sturmgeschütz III, or StuG III. This vehicle was primarily designed as an assault gun, intended to provide close support for infantry units. It was lighter and more maneuverable than its heavier counterparts, allowing for greater flexibility on the battlefield. The Allies remained skeptical of such designs, believing that larger, heavily armored tanks would always outperform lighter vehicles. In the months leading up to the testing of the StuG 3 by American forces, expectations were high on both sides. The German military believed their innovations would give them a significant edge, while the Allies were confident that their strategies would thwart any attempts at German superiority. The prevailing wisdom among the Allies still clung to the idea that firepower and armor were paramount. They prepared to face the StuG 3 with an array of their own tanks, believing that their heavier models could easily overpower any opposition. However, as the war unfolded, the reality on the battlefield began to shift. The Germans successfully employed the StuG 3 in various operations, showcasing its effectiveness in ambush tactics and as a mobile artillery platform. Reports from the front lines indicated that the vehicle's low profile made it a challenging target, and its ability to maneuver quickly in tight spaces provided an advantage that larger tanks could not match. Yet these successes did not sway the Allies, who remained steadfast in their belief that they could defeat any enemy through sheer numbers and firepower. The American military, in particular, was eager to test the German vehicle. They aimed to understand its capabilities and limitations, seeking to gather intelligence that would inform their own strategies going forward. This desire for knowledge was a double-edged sword. While it demonstrated a commitment to adapting to the evolving nature of warfare, it also highlighted a significant blind spot, a failure to fully appreciate the advantages of lighter, more agile vehicles. As the Allies prepared for the encounter with the StuG 3, they held onto their preconceived notions of what constituted a formidable tank. The emphasis was still on heavy armor and larger guns, underscoring a disconnect between their strategies and the realities of the battlefield. The German forces, meanwhile, had already recognized that versatility and adaptability were becoming essential in modern warfare, paving the way for innovative designs like the StuG 3. When the day finally arrived for the Americans to test the StuG 3, they did so with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. They had gathered an array of their own tanks, confident that their heavy armor would prevail. Yet the battlefield would soon reveal the limitations of their expectations and the advantages that the Germans had harnessed through their unique approach to armored warfare. The stage was set for a pivotal moment in the understanding of modern military strategy. Ultimately, the context surrounding the testing of the StuG-3 reflected a widespread belief that was beginning to falter. The war was not simply a contest of tanks, it was a complex interplay of tactics, technology, and the willingness to adapt. As the Allies braced for what lay ahead, they were about to confront a lesson that would reshape their understanding of armored warfare. The decisive factor that would lead to the American forces' surprise during the testing of the StuG-3 lay in their underestimation of the vehicle's design philosophy. The Allies were entrenched in their belief that size and firepower dictated superiority on the battlefield. This mindset blinded them to the advantages of mobility and tactical innovation that the Germans had embraced. The StuG-3 was not merely another tank. It was a reflection of a strategic shift that prioritized adaptability and efficiency over brute strength. American military doctrine often emphasized the importance of overpowering the enemy through sheer numbers. The prevailing assumption was that larger tanks, equipped with powerful cannons and heavy armor, would dominate the battlefield. This doctrine created a blind spot when it came to recognizing the effectiveness of lighter, more versatile vehicles. The StuG-3's design, which focused on a lower profile and a potent cannon, challenged this conventional wisdom. Moreover, the Germans had successfully integrated the StuG-3 into their combined arms approach, where infantry, artillery, and armor worked in concert. This coordination was often overlooked by American strategists who were still grappling with the lessons of World War I. The expectation was that tanks would act independently, leading to a misjudgment of how the StuG-3 operated within the broader context of German military tactics. As the Americans prepared for the test, they had not fully grasped the psychological impact that the StuG-3 would have on the battlefield. The vehicle's ability to appear suddenly and deliver devastating fire from a concealed position created an atmosphere of uncertainty among enemy troops. This psychological edge was a critical component that the Americans had underestimated, believing that their heavier tanks would intimidate the German forces. The prevailing American attitude also reflected a cultural bias towards larger vehicles. Many in the military hierarchy associated size with power, failing to recognize that a smaller, more agile vehicle could effectively exploit weaknesses in their tactics. This cultural blind spot would soon become evident as the Americans faced the realities of combat with the StuG-3. In addition, the Allies had not fully considered the implications of the StuG-3's battlefield role. Designed primarily as an assault gun, it was engineered to provide direct support to infantry units. This focus on close support meant that the StuG-3 was often deployed in scenarios where heavier tanks struggled to maneuver. The American forces, meanwhile, were still fixated on engaging the enemy with their larger tanks, overlooking the value of integrating lighter vehicles into their operations. The failure to recognize the evolving nature of warfare also extended to the Allies' overall strategic approach. The Germans had adapted their tactics to account for the fluidity of modern combat, whereas the Americans were still operating within a framework that emphasized static defense and overwhelming firepower. This disconnect would soon reveal itself during the testing of the StuG-3, as the Americans discovered the limitations of their own doctrines. As the day of testing approached, the American forces were confident in their own capabilities. They believed that their tanks, built to withstand direct fire and deliver powerful shots, would easily overcome the StuG-3. However, this confidence was rooted in a misunderstanding of the vehicle's design and its role within the German military strategy. The Americans were about to learn a valuable lesson about the importance of adaptability in warfare. The StuG-3, in all its compact efficiency, would challenge the American forces' assumptions and reveal a gap in their understanding of armored combat. This blind spot, coupled with the psychological impact of the vehicle's design, would play a critical role in shaping the outcome of the upcoming encounter. The stage was set for a moment that would force the Allies to re-evaluate their approach to the battlefield. The technology and design of the StuG-3 represented a significant shift in armored warfare. It was built on three critical technical pillars: mobility, firepower, and concealment. Each of these elements combined to create a vehicle that could adapt to the demands of the battlefield, providing a tactical advantage that the Allies had not anticipated. Mobility was perhaps the most defining feature of the StuG-3. Unlike traditional tanks that prioritized heavy armor and firepower, the StuG-3 was designed to be lighter and more agile. This focus on weight reduction allowed for greater maneuverability across varied terrains, enabling it to navigate tight spaces and engage in hit-and-run tactics. Records indicate that its lower profile made it a difficult target for enemy fire, enhancing its survivability on the battlefield. The second pillar was firepower. The StuG-3 was equipped with a powerful 75mm gun, which was capable of engaging enemy armor effectively. This weapon system was mounted on a chassis that allowed for a low silhouette, thus combining the advantages of both mobility and firepower. The Germans understood that firepower alone was not sufficient. Delivering accurate shots from a concealed position could turn the tide of battle. The StuG-3 excelled in this regard, allowing it to strike decisively while remaining hidden from view. Concealment was the third critical pillar of the StuG-3's design. Positioned as an assault gun, it was often deployed in support of infantry units, taking advantage of the terrain to remain out of sight. This ability to stay hidden until the moment of engagement provided a psychological edge over the enemy. The Americans, believing they could engage with their larger tanks, overlooked the tactical implications of facing a vehicle that operated effectively from concealed positions. The combination of these three pillars created a vehicle that was not only effective in direct combat, but also versatile in its deployment. The StuG-3 could adapt to various battlefield scenarios, providing support where it was needed most while maintaining a low profile. This adaptability was something the Allies had not fully accounted for, as they focused primarily on the weight and firepower of their own designs. The implications of this technological shift became evident as the Americans prepared for their encounter with the StuG-3. The Allies had invested heavily in their larger tanks, believing that size would prevail. However, the innovations embodied in the StuG-3 highlighted a critical flaw in this logic. The Germans had recognized that the battlefield was evolving beyond traditional notions of armor and firepower, embracing a more integrated approach to armored warfare. As the Allies faced the reality of the StuG-3, they would come to understand that lacking a vehicle with such mobility and tactical versatility left them at a disadvantage. The technological edge that the Germans had achieved through the StuG-3 was not something that could be easily compensated for by conventional means. The Americans were about to confront a moment that would reshape their understanding of armored warfare in profound ways. In the end, the technology of the StuG-3 was not merely about the vehicle itself, but about the strategies and doctrines that guided its use. The Germans had effectively harnessed the advantages of mobility, firepower, and concealment, creating a platform that could operate dynamically in the chaos of war. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force the Allies to re-evaluate their own approaches to armored combat. The hidden engine that drove this technological shift was the recognition that modern warfare required more than just brute strength. The Allies, still rooted in their traditional doctrines, were about to learn a valuable lesson about the necessity of adaptation in the face of changing battlefield dynamics. The encounter with the StuG-3 would mark a pivotal moment in their understanding of armored warfare. On a late spring morning in 1944, the sun rose over the American testing grounds, illuminating the landscape where the fate of armored warfare would soon be challenged. Soldiers moved with purpose, their ranks filled with anticipation and uncertainty. As the Americans prepared to engage the German StuG Third, the atmosphere was charged with tension. They had gathered an array of their own tanks, convinced that their heavy armor could easily dominate the battlefield. The first encounter began with a series of maneuvers. American tanks rumbled into position, their engines roaring as they took aim at the seemingly unassuming StuG Third. The air was thick with dust, and the sound of clanking metal echoed across the field. As the order was given to fire, the Americans expected to see the StuG Third crumble under their firepower. However, what transpired was far from their expectations. From behind a hill, the StuG Third emerged, its low profile barely visible against the terrain. A single shot rang out, striking one of the American tanks and sending it spiraling into chaos. Confusion spread through the ranks as the realization sank in. The StuG Third was not the easy target they had anticipated. Soldiers scrambled to reposition their tanks, but the agile German vehicle had already darted away, leaving them bewildered. The Americans quickly regrouped, determined to adjust their tactics. However, the StuG Third's ability to strike from concealed positions continued to frustrate their efforts. Every attempt to engage was met with the same disheartening reality. The Germans had effectively turned the battlefield into a game of cat and mouse. The psychological impact of this dynamic began to weigh heavily on the American troops, who had come prepared to dominate. As the day wore on, the Americans began to realize that they were facing a formidable adversary. The StuG Third's combination of mobility and firepower allowed it to exploit gaps in their defenses. The Allies had underestimated the tactical advantages of the German vehicle, and with each encounter, their confidence began to wane. The sound of gunfire echoed across the field, but it was met with an unsettling silence as the realization set in. They might not be able to win this confrontation. In a moment of desperation, an American commander called for a coordinated assault, aiming to overwhelm the StuG Third through sheer force. Tanks moved in unison, engines roaring as they advanced. However, the StuG Third was already repositioning, taking advantage of the terrain to fire from a concealed location. The Americans, once convinced of their superiority, now found themselves grappling with an adversary that had turned their expectations on their head. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The day had not gone as planned. The Americans, faced with the reality of the StuG Third's effectiveness, were left to ponder their assumptions about armored warfare. The echoes of the day's confrontation would linger in their minds long after the smoke had cleared. They had come seeking to test a vehicle, but they had inadvertently uncovered a deeper truth about the nature of modern combat. As the troops withdrew, the psychological impact of the day weighed heavily on them. They had entered the fray believing that size and firepower alone would secure victory, only to discover that adaptability and tactical innovation were equally, if not more, important. The encounter with the StuG Third had shattered their previous notions, forcing them to reconsider their approach to armored warfare in a rapidly evolving landscape. The testing of the StuG Third had become a pivotal moment, revealing the limitations of traditional doctrines and highlighting the necessity of adaptation in modern military strategy. The battlefield had spoken, and the Americans would have to listen closely to the lessons learned from their encounter with the German vehicle. The arithmetic of victory during the testing of the StuG Third would soon reveal stark contrasts in operational efficiency and battlefield effectiveness. In the weeks leading up to the engagement, the Americans had amassed significant resources for their armored divisions, investing heavily in the production and deployment of heavier tanks. However, the numbers would tell a different story when juxtaposed against the efficiency of the German design. The Americans deployed a fleet of larger tanks, including the M4 Sherman, which weighed approximately 30 tons and was equipped with a 75mm gun. Records indicate that the production figures for the M4 Sherman were impressive, with thousands rolling off the assembly lines each month. However, this quantity came at a cost. The sheer weight of the Sherman limited its maneuverability, making it less effective in tight combat situations compared to the lighter, more versatile StuG-3. In contrast, the StuG-3 weighed around 24 tons, making it easier to maneuver across varied terrains. This difference in weight translated to an operational advantage. While the M4 Sherman was capable of delivering significant firepower, the StuG-3's design allowed for quicker repositioning, enabling it to evade incoming fire and strike again from a different angle. In a battle where seconds counted, this mobility became a decisive factor. Moreover, the effective range of the StuG-3's 75mm gun was approximately 1,500 meters, comparable to that of the M4 Sherman. However, the Germans had optimized their tactics for this range, utilizing the StuG-3 in ways that exploited its strengths. The Americans, on the other hand, were still adhering to traditional doctrines that emphasized static engagements, missing opportunities to adapt their strategies in real time. The consumption of fuel also played a critical role in this arithmetic of victory. The M4 Sherman had a fuel capacity of around 150 gallons, which, while sufficient for extended operations, limited its operational range in the field. The StuG-3, with its more efficient engine, could operate longer distances on less fuel, allowing it to maintain a presence on the battlefield without the logistical burden that accompanied heavier tanks. As the testing unfolded, the psychological impact of these numbers became evident. The Americans, accustomed to the belief that larger tanks would dominate, found themselves in a situation where their expectations were not met. The StuG-3's ability to engage effectively while remaining concealed challenged their assumptions about firepower and armor, leading to confusion and frustration among American troops. Additionally, the Germans had effectively integrated the StuG-3 into their combined arms approach, allowing for coordinated assaults with infantry and artillery. This integration amplified the effectiveness of the vehicle, further complicating the American response. The numbers reflected not only the capabilities of the vehicles, but also the strategies that guided their use. In the end, the arithmetic of victory was not just about the numbers on paper. It was about how those numbers translated into real combat effectiveness. The encounter with the StuG-3 would force the Americans to re-evaluate their reliance on heavy armor and to consider the implications of mobility and adaptability in modern warfare. The lessons learned during this testing would resonate beyond the battlefield, shaping future strategies and doctrines in the years to come. The stark contrast in operational efficiency highlighted the necessity of adapting to the evolving nature of combat, where traditional assumptions about armored warfare were increasingly challenged by the realities of the battlefield. The systemic consequences of the encounter with the StuG-3 extended far beyond the immediate testing grounds. The realization that the Germans had effectively harnessed the advantages of mobility and versatility forced a re-evaluation of American military doctrine. The clash with the StuG-3 marked a pivotal moment in the understanding of armored warfare, leading to lasting changes in strategy and approaches to combat. In the wake of the testing, American military leaders began to recognize the limitations of their heavy tanks. The confidence that had characterized their approach was shaken, prompting a shift towards integrating more versatile and agile vehicles into their armored divisions. The lessons learned from the StuG-3 highlighted the necessity of adapting to the realities of modern warfare, where speed and maneuverability could prove decisive. This shift in thinking was not limited to the American military alone. The encounter with the StuG-3 reverberated across Allied forces, prompting a collective re-evaluation of existing strategies. Military leaders began to understand that the effectiveness of armored warfare was not solely dependent on the size of the vehicle, but on how it was integrated into broader operational strategies. Moreover, the testing of the StuG Third contributed to a growing recognition of combined arms tactics. The Germans had successfully utilized the vehicle in concert with infantry and artillery, demonstrating the effectiveness of a more integrated approach. This realization spurred Allied forces to explore similar strategies, seeking to enhance coordination among different branches of the military. The psychological impact of the encounter also played a significant role in shaping future engagements. The experience of facing the StuG-3 left a lasting impression on American troops, fostering a greater understanding of the need for adaptability in the face of evolving battlefield dynamics. This shift in mindset would influence training and preparation for subsequent operations, emphasizing the importance of flexibility and innovation. As the war progressed, the legacy of the StuG-3 continued to inform armored warfare strategies. The vehicle became a symbol of the need for adaptability, challenging traditional notions of dominance based solely on firepower. The lessons learned from the testing would echo in the years to come, shaping the design and deployment of armored units in future conflicts. The systemic changes initiated by the encounter with the StuG-3 also extended to the post-war period. Military leaders recognized the need to evolve in response to the changing nature of warfare, leading to a re-evaluation of armored vehicles and their roles on the battlefield. The experience of confronting the StuG-3 became a catalyst for innovation and adaptation in military technology and strategy. Ultimately, the impact of the StuG-3 transcended its immediate operational context. It challenged the prevailing doctrines of the time and prompted a re-evaluation of how armored warfare should be approached. The lessons learned from this encounter would shape the future of military engagements, emphasizing the importance of adaptability, coordination, and the integration of diverse capabilities. The testing of the StuG-3 marked a turning point in the understanding of armored warfare, forcing a reconsideration of traditional assumptions and leading to systemic changes that would resonate far beyond the battlefield. The encounter had exposed a critical gap in American military doctrine, one that would need to be addressed in order to effectively navigate the complexities of modern combat. Reflecting on the testing of the StuG-3, the question emerges: how could such a seemingly modest vehicle challenge the might of larger tanks? The answer lies not in the vehicle itself, but in the systems and strategies that guided its use. It wasn't the best tank that won, but the best integrated approach to armored warfare. As the Allies moved forward, they faced a new question: how would they adapt their strategies to meet the challenges of an evolving battlefield?